Greetings, everyone. My name is William Porter. Welcome to this edition of Storytelling Time. This program is sponsored by Every Black Entrepreneur Network. And I'm very happy to have with us today Reverend James Davis, pastor of Grace AME Giant Church here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So, Pastor, it's good having you today.
It's good to be on.
Having you.
Yes, sir. It's my honor to be here. And thank you so much, Dr. Porter, for allowing me to share this moment with you.
Great. Well, I want to ask you, first of all, about how things have been over the last, I'd say, I guess weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, since you've known about your reappointment. And I know you, as well as the family, have been going through a whole lot over these past few days as far as prep is concerned. And how have things been during this period, still having to pastor Grace AME Zion Church?
Oh, man, yes. It's been an interesting time. I actually knew probably 2 months ago that I would be moving. And they just didn't make the announcement until a few weeks ago. And so it was really difficult, number one, to keep it a secret and or to not indulge information out until it was the proper time to do it. And so you have a lot of internal conflicts because, you know, you want to let a church whom you've pastored for 5 years know that I've been called to another church, and however you want to give that church time to transition. But then you have the bishops saying, hey, don't say anything to anybody just yet, in case, you know, things happen, or however they do things in that hierarchy system of structure, right?
Yeah.
But it has been for us a little surreal, if you will. It has been challenging because for all of my adult life, I've only lived here. And for my wife has only known North Carolina as her place of residence and home. And although I pastor in Raleigh, you know, we actually live in Fayetteville. Right. And so it's already the distance of that, trying to pastor in Fayetteville. Pastor in Raleigh, but live in Fayetteville. So, of course, I spent a lot of my time on the road. And so I've got to know Raleigh really well. I am a foodie, so I got to know all the good food spots. And now we're journeying into Chicago, and this is a big city, and this is way different than what any of my family members are used to. Now, I grew up military, so you know we traveled around quite frequently. But all of my adult life, I've been kind of settled here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and in the maybe Eastern North Carolina area, where I've pastored about 4 different churches. So there's some excitement. There is some bittersweet moments. I just had the pleasure of this being my last week, and I was in the office yesterday. And when I was in the office, it was real emotional because you inject yourself and become vulnerable to places that, that you really spend time with. You really develop a relationship with you and your family and many other families of grace that is hard to part with. You know, so it's been I've been not anxious. I actually put off a lot of the things I needed to do because I'd like, this is not real. This is not happening. Right. But it's happening and it is real. So it's kind of been touch and go. But my baby boys, they flew on the plane for the first time, my son. And just to see his excitement of, wow, Dad, we're flying. And so it's good. You know, you get to teach lessons that you would not teach if you weren't transitioning. And I think that's a big key of what happens in transition. You get to experience, number one, different things. You get to transfer knowledge that you already know, but then you gain deeper knowledge in transition. So that has been enlightening.
Well, I can imagine you mentioned your sons the first time they've flown. And I can remember the first time I flew, and I was an adult. And it was an experience. But you mentioned Chicago, and you are a military person, and so you've been around. But me and my wife Yvonne were talking the other day, saying that you're going to have to develop a slightly different wardrobe for the winter city, especially during the winter. Yeah. It's a little different than what it is down here in North Carolina. But anyway, I'm sure that's a change. Well, listen, you've been my pastor, of course, for the last 5 years, and I really appreciate your leadership. And obviously, with any change like this, a departure, there's a sadness, but on the other hand, there is an expectation and a certain degree of excitement. And so you hinted toward that just a minute ago. So we all wish you well as you move forward, as we all should be moving forward. And now address that idea of moving forward in just a second.
All right.
But anyway, as far as Chicago is concerned and your new position, are you at liberty to say anything about your new duties? Will it be similar to what you were doing at Grace, and or what?
Yes, sir. It's similar. I will go be the head pastor of Martin Temple and Zion Church in South Side of Chicago. And every place you go, every church is different. This would be my 5th church that I've pastored in a span of about 15 years, I believe. And so I typically stay at a church probably 3 to 4 years and then I've been progressed on. I will say that this church presents a different challenge than what was presented when I got to Grace. No place is without transformation. No church is without, or any position you go to, no position is without a challenge, without something that needs to be done or something that needs to be revamped or reworked. I believe that we all should be evolving. And so this congregation is a flagship church in our denomination. And it seems like this would be my 2nd time following a bishop that has made it to the episcopacy. And that can be a challenge within itself, not because of the bishops, but just because, again, that church grows a love for a pastor that was there for 12 years. And then you come behind them having to be their pastor. And let me just say this, and I said a little bit Sunday, that people don't just let you be their pastor. You have to kind of earn that. That's a trust issue. That's a trust thing. It's not really an issue, but it's trust. It's the trust that that person will take care of my soul. It's also a trust that you're letting that person in and being vulnerable enough to do that. So I will say that the challenges at this church, I've been prepared because of the challenges I faced at Grace coming in. And although a wonderful church, it still teaches you a lot. I don't care how wonderful places are when you get there. There's something you can learn as a leader. As you're leading, you should be learning as well. You should be evolving in your leadership, whether it's administrative skills, spiritually, especially as we talk about, the church setting, the church world. So the duties here at this church are similar to Grace, but they have unique challenges to a major city that has crime rates, that have poverty rates, they have tent cities around there with homeless. And so there's some things that you have to really address. I am encouraged because a lot of the needs that we met or we saw in Raleigh are some of the needs that we see that need to happen in Chicago, just magnified. And we'll see how we can address those needs going in.
Okay, I want to switch gears just a little bit. I don't know whether you remember or not, but when you first came to Grace, I talked with you a little bit, and you mentioned that that you might want to write a book. I don't know if you remember that or not. You realizing that I'm an author, so I guess that's why we got into that
That's right.
discussion. So are you still interested in that? And if you are, where are you as far as possibly developing a book?
Well, I am still interested in writing. I think once I get done with this doctoral program, I'll take a short break because that's a lot of writing, and then I'll dive into it. I think my interest has changed, which shifts kind of your perspective on what you want to do. So many times in my career, I've had to go into places and bring about transformation. And so even in my doctoral work, how do you develop a model of transformation for an institution how do you measure that, right? And so then it switched to the financial backings of a church that helps guide them in success, which I think that I don't care what you do, having a strong footing financially helps you, gird you, build you up in order to accomplish it. So to answer your question, yes. Now I just have to just funnel my mind in the direction of, do I want to do a self-help book? Do I want to do a book that guides leaders, transform churches? So I have a few. I think when we talked before, I have a book that I have some manuscript for it. I have some chapters kind of sketched out, and it deals with my tales as a teenage father. You know, I was a father at the age of 17. And reflecting on that now, some odd years later, my oldest is 21, reflecting on that 21 years ago from now, oh man, I learned a lot. And I want to be able to share that experience with hopefully preventing that type of situation. But to let people know that, listen, even if that is something that happens, you can definitely bounce back from it. Definitely bounce back. So, yeah.
Okay. The thing I want to ask you about now is, before we totally leave the situation of you being at Grace and having been at Grace for 5 years, I believe, and now transitioning into another situation, if you thought about it a lot, and I know you've thought about it, what are at least 3 things? You may limit it to 3 things, or if you want to go further, you can, but what are 3 things that you're most proud of as far as your accomplishments since you've been at Grace?
Oh, wow. That's
I guess 3 is a low number.
No, it's
Anyway.
not. Well, I was very calculated when I came to Grace because, again, you follow a bishop that was very loved by the church, and did a great job when he came in, given the circumstances that he walked into. But again, every situation, some unique challenges. And one unique challenge was the financial structure of our church. And the financial structure was a little in disarray. And we had to overcome that. And to sit back and look at where the church is currently. I just pulled the accounts before I left, and I showed the chairwoman of the trustee board where we are, and just sitting back in amazement to know that 5 years ago, we were not having this conversation. 5 years ago, we were figuring out how we weren't going to go into foreclosure as a church. And now we're a church that is debt-free, have no mortgage, and have done a lot of things to our church to beautify it, and owe nobody anything. That is one accomplishment that I can sit back and say I'm amazed about. Another accomplishment would be our feeding ministry. Grace feeds the community and the less fortunate, homeless, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And when we got there, we were only we had a bread bank connection, and then we were funding that kitchen off of the ladies that were working back there and benevolence funds that we received from the church. And over the span of 5 years, we have partnered with other organizations that have allowed us to expand how much we feed, how many people we feed, and what we are able to house. We have donated through grants, Sub-Zero refrigerators, freezers. We got a grant in order to upfit the kitchen with a commercial stove, 3-tier sink, new countertops and cabinets. And so I'm proud that the ministry didn't die. When COVID came, we didn't know how we were going to continue to feed the community because the need grew. We went from feeding maybe 40 people a day to feeding 120 people a day. That's a lot off of the same amount of resources that you have. But we were able to do it. And I'm proud of that under my watch, we didn't have to reduce the service. We actually increased it. Lastly, I think I will say that I'm just proud that our accomplishment that I can see is that with a lot of churches, especially with the pastor coming in, things are not going to stay the same. And one thing that I can just say that I am proud of is that we were able, I believe, to shift the church in such a direction that it sets the church up for continual growth. And those are three accomplishments that I can just say. Now, within there are little other accomplishments, but I can just say overall in a broad, brush or stroke of things, that I think my most accomplished thing that I can say is that I didn't please man, but I tried my best to please God. And I think it's evident with whoever comes behind me to take over Grace Church.
Okay, well, you've talked about accomplishments as far as Grace is concerned. I might add one more thing, and that is an accomplishment in terms of your growth from the time you came to Grace and now in terms of administration, in terms of delivering the message. Would you think that those kinds of things were an improvement as well, as far as you personally?
Yes, I thank you for yielding, reeling me in on that one, and that's a personal reflection that I war with a lot. I believe I've grown administratively. I tell anybody I am not the most organized person. I could organize thoughts in when I was a band director. My assistant band director said, "Oh, it was so hard because you would have it in your head and you wouldn't have it on paper for everybody else to kind of." But I will say that administratively, I've grown. I had to assume the first church responsibilities, which assumes handling the district and preparing things and getting things done for that level. Also assumed the role as a preaching professor for the conference. And so you grow in that aspect as well. I also will say that I learned that it's okay for everybody not to like you. It's okay for not everybody to agree with what you do. We had, I can say we had a lot of people join, but I also have to admit we had a lot of people leave. And somehow I thought it was a reflection of me. And I had to discover that you care about people's soul and how they transition, but everything's not your fault. And sometimes people bless you two ways, when they come and when they go, right? And so so those are some things, because I used to take it very personal. I used to take it personal. I used to think that there was some type of flaw in me. Well, you can always do things better, of course, but I had to learn how not to take things so personal. Last thing I would say I definitely grew in, and I grew in with community relations. If you're going to pastor Grace Church, you've got to know the community. And I say it just like that. You have to know the community. You need to know who the mayor is. You need to know, and I mean, you need to know them, shake their hand, know who they are, the city councilmen, that the neighborhood activists. And so I can definitely say I'm happy that I took the time to know the city and not just to come in and preach on a Sunday and do Bible study on Tuesday. No, I've learned the city.
Okay. Well, listen, one more thing that I'd like to ask you, but I'll save that until we come from a break. And we'll be back in just a minute with Pastor James Davis. So stay with us. Well, welcome back. We're here with Reverend James Davis, pastor of Grace Amen Zion Church here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'd like to ask you about something relating to business. I'm a part of the group Every Dot Black. What we're concerned with is helping business people enhance their productivity in business. And so we've learned that one word that's very, very key as far as enhancing yourself in business and in life in general, I believe, and that is purpose, having purpose. And it's kind of interesting that your final message dealt with having purpose from the standpoint of me looking at purpose as looking forward, looking towards something, having a goal. And I know you mentioned that you have, I forget the term that you use, but to look forward to the future and believe that the future has something good for you. Mm-hmm. It was the essence of your message. So what do you think about that as far as having a purpose in your life, and especially with Grace, as far as our moving forward in a new direction with new leadership?
Well, I think that, let me just a few things. I think that you ought to live your life on purpose. Sometimes when you messed up as a child, they say, now, did you do that on purpose? And sometimes things are a mistake, but what I do know is that mistakes rarely yield success. Now, if I'm trying to make something happen and I make a mistake and it does happen, I'm still moving forward with purpose. You see what I'm saying? Like, I just don't think that you just automatically become a millionaire by mistake. You don't necessarily become a business person by mistake. Now, you might have mistakenly created something, but you had to market that mistake on purpose. You had to go develop it. You had to package it. You had to do some things. So there's purpose, right? And I think that we ought to live our life on purpose, and you ought to know where you're going. As it relates to business or church or institution, anything that's an institution, because church has a business component to it. When I walked into Grace, I saw where it was, but Lord knows I saw where it needed to go. And every move that we made was to fulfill that purpose. It was we developed a plan for financial freedom for the church on purpose. We developed the thought that we needed a change in CPA status on purpose. And when you have a goal, you do things on purpose in order to get there. I think it's the same thing with business. Whatever the purpose is, I'm moving forward with that. Again, I'll make mistakes along the way, but those mistakes help me develop purpose, right? I don't think anybody who is successful just did it the first time and it was there, right? I believe that there's some things, I call it failing forward. Sometimes you fail forward, right? And so that's so not, but as it relates to Grace and the future, I do need to say this as it relates to the church institution, that I don't believe that the pastor alone is the visionary, right? I believe vision is given to the pastor, to the leader, and we're set out to accomplish. But I also believe that when the pastor changed, the purpose doesn't. In our culture of church, especially Black church, we're very tribal in nature. Whatever the head says, it's kind of what we do. Sometimes we don't agree with it. It's kind of what we do. And there's no challenge, there's no this, right? But what happens if a pastor walks into a church and the pastor becomes a part of the purpose rather than trying to redirect the purpose, rather than trying to stir up something, rather than trying to create something that's already been created? What happens if a pastor comes in and says, oh, I'm going to join in with the purpose of the church, and I'm going to help us move forward? I think sometimes we spin our wheels and we go backwards, because when transition comes, we think that the direction change or the purpose changes, anything like that. Let me go biblical with you right quick. When Moses passed and his successor came, he never stopped the promise that was on the people. It was just his opportunity to lead them where they needed to be. And I think in church transition, we ought to keep that in mind. Because what churches end up doing is you end up wasting time. You end up wasting a whole lot of money trying to do another vision, trying to do another purpose. But what happens if the shared purpose is now this person's opportunity to help the church fulfill it?
Well, I do remember you saying in that sermon, the man may change, but the mission remains the same. And I think that's what you're saying with that. Well, let's shift another gear and talk about some current events.
All right.
And as you know, in the last 2.5 years, we've had a pandemic, and we still have a pandemic, actually. We've had social unrest, racial tension. There have been weather situations that have been unprecedented, shootings, and a lot of other things been going on in our society. So do you think that, staying with the more spiritual aspect for a moment, do you think God is speaking to us as a nation, as a society, via all these things happening that I don't remember ever happening before, at least at this level of intensity, especially the pandemic?
Yeah, I'll say that there's scripture that says, and the scripture escaped me, I was looking for it before I got here. Bishop Blue preached about this one time. He says that you will see all these signs, but not yet. I think that with evolution comes problem solving. We have to tap into something that creates normacy in what's present. It is no mistake, or maybe I shouldn't say that. It is no alarm to me that racial tension is still here. It is no alarm to me that the racial disparities that you see are still present. What alarms me about it is the lack of fight that we have from those who I believe voices were prominent and dominant in times past. Let me talk about the AME Zion Church for a moment. The AME Zion Church is known as the Freedom Church because it spoke to the current needs of the 1796 when the church was chartered and erected. We love to hinge on the fact that Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass all came through the AME Zion Church. Well, they had a voice and a power that spoke to that day. My issue is that the church is not speaking to issues anymore. I think we dance around them. We create a little subcommittee within the church to deal with it. We'll get a report on it, but what's actually being done? So then you have movements like Black Lives Matter movement that has swept through the country. And I will say has done what organizations in past have done. The racial tension that we see is not a result of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a result of racial tension. I don't think we need to give him that much power to think that he can cause all of this, right? I don't think that's there. You saw racial tension when Barack Obama was elected within the cabinets fighting. But you also saw some unity because if it wasn't for those of different color, he wouldn't even got elected, right? And so just when you see signs of hope, then these other nasty things begin to air their head. And so my big thought upon this is that we're not dealing with anything new, but we're dealing with it in a new era, which now we have to address it in new ways. But equality and equity have always been an issue. Has always been an issue. We can be at the same football game, but those who have money are in the press box, right? You know, we can be on the same flight, but those who have the money sit in first class. We can have the same health problem, but those who have the better insurance gets the best care. It is not new, the racial tension and disparities that we see. In some ways, we keep embellishing it. We keep yearning for it. We keep liking it in some way until what we like is no longer on our street. Right. And so for me, I think that even in Black America, we see the disparities. But even sometimes I put it like this, I love Deion Sanders for a fact that he is at a HBCU, Jackson State University. Yes, JSU, Sonic Boom in the South, baby. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. So I could talk about that. Deion Sanders has gone inside there and he is transforming how we look at HBCU football. Athletics for that reason. Well, as soon as he gets some tension doing what he's doing, doing the things he's doing, making the strides that he's making, now the white institutions, the PWIs, we want him. Deion Sanders has a move. Now, I'm not trying to say he wouldn't, or I'm not trying to say he won't in the future, but what I'm simply trying to say is that it takes people that aren't looking for money, but looking to transform, to get into spots and places like that to get things done. I don't think that where we are is any different than where we've ever been before. I just think that we're fighting them on different turfs now. Before we fought them in the streets. Now we got to fight them in the White House. Before we fought them in, listen, this country has always had civil unrest. And I think we're getting to a point now, and Lord knows I can talk about politics all day long. I think we're getting to a point now where we've become a nation that is ungovernable. We are becoming a nation that cannot take rules and regulations. We're too free. And this is what I do believe is that now we are suffering on the venom of our own bite as a society. But civil unrest, racial tension is woven into the DNA and fabric of America. People love to say we were founded on Christian belief. Well, I can go on to a history lesson about that as well, because even Christianity, when it came over here, was engulfed and drenched in racial tension.
But I've talked about this before recently, especially, I believe it's in Galatians 5:23, 24, when it talks about fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh. And I noticed that as far as the works, and I'm sure you're aware of this, works of the flesh, it mentions a lot of things, a lot of common things like adultery and fight and murders and things like that. But it also mentions contentions, at least in one version. And I thought about the fact that, well, that's what it's talking about as far as contentions are concerned. It's talking about people not being in agreement, not being in unity. And that's all that you see today, it seems to me, on every front. And they talk about it as being polarization. Mm-hmm. And but people are just not together, even as far as this pandemic is concerned, and especially as far as the vaccine and wearing masks and doing other things. And it's really kind of amazing. So
it is amazing. And one thing that I think, well, no, I don't think I know, is that we have politicized everything. We politicize everything. We politicize the pandemic. We politicize mask. We politicize the abortion. We politicize
kids going to school or being virtual.
Yeah, kids going to school at home are being virtual. If you're a conservative, you think one way. If you're a liberal, you think another way. And it's like we kind of force people into these boxes as if this is, I believe it was FDR that said parties were going to kill the democracy of our nation, and somewhere around there, I believe. And so again, that comes back to my statement that I think we've become an ungovernable nation, a nation that does not, well, I will say this. I do think that a lot of what we see now is an uncovering of what tried to be covered up with laws and everything else. This is what I do believe. Laws do not govern the hearts. They just govern the actions of an ill heart. And so there's no law you're going to put in places that's not going to make somebody a racist. It's not going to make anybody a bigot. Like no laws are going to change that. It's the heart of man. It's the heart of people. And the Bible does declare this right here. It says that the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who knoweth the heart? God knoweth the heart, and trieth the reins, which means trieth the soul. And so even when it comes down to Christendom, when it comes down to church, you have white church, black church, you have a liberal church, a conservative church, and everything is politicized. And there was a day when politics looked towards the church for guidance. Now it seems like the church is trying to make sure it's politically correct. And that is tension within itself.
I tell you what, that's a great lead in to what we'll be discussing next week. And that is the spiritual aspect of what we're talking about. But do you have anything else that you want to say before we close? Because we're coming pretty quickly to the end of this particular session.
No, listen, I would just like to say, the questions you've asked today have been great questions. And I really am interested more about organization that you're working with, and this will be aired on, because I do believe that it's podcasts like this and there's conversations like this that help develop change. I do believe this: if you can change your thought, Bible declares that be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think when our minds begin to be changed, that's when our hearts begin to feel differently, think differently. And heart is really just another not the muscle, but the soul of a person, right? And so I think mind-changing conversations like this will make someone think differently. And so thank you so much for inviting me on to just share my little thoughts with you. I would like to take a point of privilege and say thank you for allowing me for the past 5 years to be your pastor and to be with your family through some trying times, just like other families. And so you've been very supportive, and you've been very inspirational. And I definitely hope, although I'm not the pastor of Grace Church, I can still be your friend. So thank you so much.
Right. And speaking of inspirational, we also have an inspirational book club that I'll talk to you about later, as a matter of fact.
All right.
Well, I tell you what, we had a great session, and I'd like to thank especially our audience. And if you want to contact Grace Church, you can get that information. It's on the screen, and maybe you can talk with Reverend Davis before he leaves. But at any rate, I'd like for you all to know that whatever you may be going through, just keep this in mind, that there's always more good things coming your way. And we'll be seeing you next time.